Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Other Coast, the Malifaux podcast brought to you out of Southern California. My name is Colgan, and today joining us after a long hiatus is our co-host from the East Coast, Jim.
Hey everybody, I am back and I am in fact alive.
Yes, always great to hear that you're not dead, Jim. It's always a pleasure. So, recently we did an episode about the Arcanist upgrades, and we were thinking that we'd want to go through every faction, kind of going through the upgrades, talking about, what our thoughts are, what situations we think they'd be strong in, and like how they stack up against faction upgrades in other factions. And the next faction we were eyeing was the Bayou Faction, but we ran into the wall where Jeff and I don't really play Bayou, so
I see the problem.
we were hoping we could get a bit of your expertise on the Hillbilly Gremlins and, kind of pick your brain about where they are. Like, I have my own thoughts about the upgrades, but I'd be interesting to hear it because I haven't really played too much with them and I don't have like a great knowledge of the Bayou. So I guess before we dive into too much, just so everyone knows, we will be talking about the general faction upgrades. So these are generally 2-cost upgrades. There's about 3 of them for each faction, and they're usually limited at plentiful 2, meaning you can only take at max 2 of each when you're hiring your crew. The first upgrade I wanted to ask you about was inferiority complex. Like, just looking at it for me, Ruthless is super useful. Being able to kind of attach that to any beater model you want when you're running into some kind of Neverborn crew with a lot of terrifying seems really great. Swagger looks like, it's a great efficiency action. And the minion ability, Bully, also seems, I've seen it used to great effect in a lot of crews. So I was wondering, like, what are your general thoughts on it? Like, when do you usually take it? And yeah.
Oh, sure. So, right off the bat, I call this upgrade complex because inferiority complex is a mouthful. And you're right. Like, this is, first off, I just want to say blanket statement. Bayou's upgrades are all in a happy place of that you will take, as a Bayou player, you will take every upgrade at some point. But I don't think any of them are auto includes. Inferiority complex, if you're going up against something that does have terrifying or manipulative, like you pointed out, that Neverborn crew, 100% it's worth it. If you're paying 2 stones for Swagger, that is not worth it, because Swagger is encouraging you to take walk actions when you don't have focused. And we have talked in the past about what is the value of a different action. Like, is a walk action the same value as a concentrate, as an attack, whatever? If you're putting inferiority complex on something, giving it focused and being able to punch things that have terrifying and manipulative, it's probably going on a model that wants to do attacks. So if you're not getting it for the Ruthless, I think that's where it kind of falls off for me. I don't want to just pay 2 stones for Swagger. The minion effect, that's going to change the calculus a little bit, because Bayou have a lot of really interesting triggers on minions. The ones I'm thinking of right off the bat, you have like Rooster Riders, Good Old Boys, and Sommer's crew. Both of those, they want to beat people up, and if they can get in there and, giving them built-in drunken strength, I think is the trigger on Good Old Boys. Just going up to a casual minimum 3 or 4, whatever the poison thing is for them, seems okay. Or even better, built-in ricochet, which means you're just throwing out damage. So, like, inferiority complex to me is answering the question, what is my tool against manipulative or ruthless?
Yeah, so then you kind of see like everything else as kind of a bonus. So I guess in that case, are there situations where you would actually take inferiority complex? Oh, you're right, that is a mouthful. Is there any case where you would actually take that just for the bully, or is it if there's nothing with like terrifying or manipulative across the board, you're not really going to be eyeing this upgrade?
I don't think I'm taking it for bully. Bayou's minions are generally lower cost than other factions because it's the cheap and cheerful faction. So you're not really getting as much mileage out of Bully. And Good Old Boys, I brought them up earlier, they already have Swagger. So, actually, do they? I might be lying. Tell us in the comments if I'm wrong about good old boys.
Speaking of which, though, I did that was interesting because I remember when I first started Malifaux, just the idea of being able to get like free focus on your model seems so good to me that like whenever I saw a model, I think the first time I saw a model swagger, I'm like, oh, this is just broken as all hell. Like you just walk around like something you're gonna do anyways, and you're just getting focus all the time. But then, yeah, I agree with you. Like once you get into game, I remember like I think I had a model swagger, and I think it went off like maybe once. You know, like during the first turn, and then after that, it was like, well, I don't really want to walk. Like any model generally that I wanted focus on is something I wanted like stuck in hitting things or shooting things, and I didn't really want to waste time walking around if I didn't have to.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I come down on it. You also have the problem where in Bayou, you have several ways to give your own pieces focused through making concentrate a shouting order, through Old Cranky, or pulsing out focus with Ma Tucket. And as soon as you do that, swagger doesn't do anything for you. And for the record, good old boys do have swagger built in.
So then do you think like part of it too is since you have so many options for getting focus from other models in Bayou that it also kind of devalues swagger a little bit within the faction?
Oh, sure. You generally don't want to take just a ton of walk actions for I walk and focus, when I can just be like, I give this guy focus, and now he can go pew pew with his 14-inch gun. I think I'm repeating myself a little bit on this guy, but you get the picture. It makes your beaters better against the targets that you want to beat against. But it's really the most offensive upgrade that you have in Bayou. The other two are really more defensive or disruptive.
So I guess the next thing that we kind of want to dive into, and I'm also curious about. So since it sounds like you're mainly taking it just for the Ruthless, I'm guessing when you're taking this, you're looking mainly at beater models or some more fighting models that you're going to place this upgrade on. So considering most of the time it's going to overcome some kind of defensive tech, is the model that you'll take it on kind of dependent on the crew you're running against? Or are there like one or two models in Bayou where it's like, these are just the premier fighters in Bayou, so whenever I'm going to take this upgrade, I'm going to bring one of these along just so I can kill as many things as possible?
So I have been finding that Francois Lacroix is the preeminent beater model in Bayou. He is Ophelia's henchman, so if he's with Ophelia, you have two models right there that love inferiority complex. You have Zoraida, who can take Francois and pump him full of actions through Obey and just get so much value. Like if you ensorcel Francois and just, okay, I'll walk him up, he'll swagger to get that focus, and I'll tell him with my second AP to shoot, or if it's far enough away, concentrate. Francois starts the game, I'll walk up the board with double focus, and he can go to town with his gun or his sword. Ma Tucket will probably sometimes take a Whiskey Golem because it pairs very well with Sparks, and a Whiskey Golem is nimble, which means he can walk as a bonus action. So you pair that with Swagger, and now you have a model that can walk, gain focus as a bonus, and then charge, and has a decent damage spread. Outside of that, most of the other crews have like a dedicated beater in keyword, and they would be a great pick for it. I think your only master beaters... Oh, that sounded weird. The only other models that I'll put this on are going to be either your leader, that is a primary damage dealer, or if it happens to be a punchy minion that I can get mileage out of the bully, then I'll consider putting it there. So an example of that again is the Rooster Rider, or maybe the good old boy, because their melee triggers and their gun triggers are really good. It kind of depends if I expect my opponent to bring cheap minions or cheaper models, because there's no good bringing a bully model if you're not going to have anything you can actually bully. And at that point, I might as well put it on one of the premier beaters, which tend to be enforcers and henchmen in Bayou.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then I guess what I'm generally hearing is that you won't necessarily just like pull like the same thing. Even though Francois sounds like he's a great beater model, most of the time it's like you already have your crew in and you already have like those in keyword. I feel like we got to stop using the word beater now.
Yeah.
You have your premier damage dealers. There we go. that you'll put it onto, and you're not necessarily like hiring out of keyword just to like get your now terrifying minion hunter or model hunter.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. So I guess I have a basic idea. So for the most part, you're taking Ruthless and you're placing it on your damage dealers. So I guess in that case, where do you feel like this upgrade ranks within the Bayou faction itself? Like out of the three upgrades, do you think it's something that it's a bit more powerful than the other ones in terms, even though it sounds like for you, every upgrade kind of has its place and it depends more on the matchup than like we always take this one.
I think this is the one I take the most commonly because at the end of the day, if I have the stones for an upgrade and I want to take an upgrade and not another model, this is the one that has the most widely applicable benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So this is probably top in my mind for Bayou upgrades.
Okay, cool. And I guess continuing on that kind of train of thought, where do you feel like it stacks up against faction upgrades as a whole? Do you think this is something that other faction upgrades should aspire to be? Do you think it's like a little bit too strong, or where does it sit?
I think this is at a good solid 55% in the middle of the pack. Other factions have upgrades that are like, I take this to solve this problem, and it feels like this fits into that mold.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I kind of just thought about it, but I mean, against Terrifying, it does seem like a great choice. But are there times where, even though there's no Terrifying, if there's like a certain amount of manipulative in the crew, that you're picking this up as well? Or is there like some kind of, I guess, break point? Like if they have one Terrifying model in the enemy crew, are you just going to grab this anyways because you just don't want to deal with those duels? Or is there kind of like, well, you're not really looking at this until they have maybe like 2 or 3 models with either manipulative or terrifying?
I think it's the 2 or 3 because that feels to me to be the point where you start really seeing the cumulative impact of those simple duels. Terrifying and manipulative get much worse when you have to do it more and more. Manipulative because it's slowing you down, because the easiest way to deal with manipulative is to focus. And that means that all of your attacks on someone with manipulative, you have to focus and then attack, so it's kind of like slow. The thing is, with manipulative, you still get the benefit of focus to the damage flip. That's a focus thing, not a manipulative thing. With terrifying, it's just taking it out of your hand. Both of those, if I have to spend multiple resources, actions or cards, and multiple I think is 2 or 3 models, at that point I think it breaks even. One model with terrifying, you know what, I'll bank the 6 in my hand to pass the willpower test.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess as we're always saying, it is going to be kind of a trade-off between like resources. Like at what point does it become more efficient to just grab that upgrade so you don't have to spend the extra resources? Moving on, the infamous 12 cups of coffee. After it got FAQ'd, the twitchy part on it, I remember first coming into Malifaux 3rd edition, and the first time I saw twitchy, it's just like, oh yeah, after anything moves, you just get a 1-inch move. And I think the thing that I remembered most about it is that it was something that was very easy to forget about, but it gave you an insane amount of movement.
Yes, how the mighty have fallen. If we had done this during Season 0 of Gaining Grounds, I would have told you 12 cups of coffee is a snap purchase. It's pale comparison to what it used to be. But we're going to focus on what it is now, not what it used to be. And what it is now, to me, it's a disruption tool.
Yeah, one of the things that I really like looking through the Bayou upgrades, is it seems like all of the actions or abilities on the upgrades are kind of focused towards a single purpose. Whereas like some other faction upgrades, it's like they might have a lot of good stuff, but it's not like aiming towards like one particular purpose.
Yeah, like every faction's upgrades seem to be trying to answer different questions that the faction is being forced to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know this isn't the guild upgrade section, but like lead lined coat is not really answering a problem guild has. Like guild has armor, and lead lined coat gives you armor. Yay! I think it gives you it gives you some other stuff, but like it's like more of the same. Whereas 12 cups of coffee is giving you something that a lot of the crews don't necessarily have.
Right.
Because okay, so diversion is shutting off bonus actions, which is absurd. How many models do you take in your crews, or how many models, or how many masters even, do you hire and are like, man, their bonus action is something I want to do every turn, and I might even plan around doing every turn. And this says no. No, you don't.
Yeah, that was kind of the crazy thing about diversion, because most of these abilities that I see, it's usually like, you can't do it unless you discard a card. You can't do it unless you fulfill some other condition, like pass a simple duel. But diversion's just like, no.
Yeah.
You do not get to do anything.
Like arcanists with their infamous soulstone miners who are like, we get to interact as a bonus. No, you don't. The mark territory, which is the other thing that you have with 12 Cups of Coffee, is less big of an impact, but it is something to keep in mind because in Season 1 of Gaining Grounds, a lot of the scheme marker schemes are all in like a set area. Sabotage are all near the same piece of terrain. Leave Your Mark is in the center. Runic Binding exists, and sometimes people take it. I am one of those people. I have made that choice.
On that tangent, have you ever scored a point off of Runic Binding?
Yes.
Oh, shit.
And let me tell you that the secret there is draw out secrets. Go ahead and, if you're playing Bayou, take a look at Sammy Lacroix and just realize that you can charge somebody and poke them with a pin twice and poop out 2 scheme markers and then just have another marker to complete the triangle somewhere. That's neither here nor there for the moment. The other thing about mark territory is it is a kind of... it opens up the opportunity for you to do something I call AP transference. So we talked earlier about how, swagger is okay because it lets you get a focus when you walk, as long as you don't have another focus. Mark territory lets you remove scheme markers to gain focus for each one and remove this way. It's a TN4, which is a very simple TN, and it's a Pulse 3, which is a decent sized area. Now, if you take a beater and you're like, man, I want to load up this beater with focused, it's very easy in Bayou to take a couple of very cheap minions, drop a handful of markers turn 1, and then have that beater go and just mark territory, and boom, I now have 3 focus on my beater model. My damage dealer, excuse me. I keep calling it that. So, my damage dealer.
Old habits die hard.
They do. I will say that I don't think you put 12 Cups of Coffee on a minion. If you do, you are not putting it on a minion for Twitchy. Twitchy is not worth it. It's just not. So what makes it worth it? You can have a mobile piece to run around, mark territory, and eat scheme markers for focus. You have Diversion, which turns off bonus actions. The premier model in Bayou for 12 Cups of Coffee is the Brewmaster, because Diversion is a disruption piece, and Brewmaster is the strongest disruption leader Bayou has. You could argue Zoraida is more disruptive, but Zoraida doesn't want to be taking 12 Cups of Coffee. She does not want to be within 4 of enemy models, and she does not want to be marking territory.
Yeah, that all makes sense.
With Brewmaster, if you take a look at his card, you'll see that he forces models near him to become slow, to be on negatives when they have too much poison on them, and shutting off bonus actions on top of that, it compounds and your enemy models end up having 1 action, period.
So in that case, for 12 Cups of Coffee, when you're taking Brewmaster, is this just like an auto include on Brewmaster? Like no matter what you're dropping this on, just so you can kind of just shut down models in the enemy crew?
Honestly, I think so. I can't think of a game where I have taken Brewmaster and not taken 12 Cups of Coffee and not gone later, geez, I wish I had 12 Cups of Coffee. So I guess in that sense, this is the first auto-include we have, but I don't play an awful lot of Brewmaster when I do Bayou, at least not lately.
Right.
I think for him, it's very strong, and I think it's strong on 2 other models in the faction. I think Big Brain Bryn benefits from it because I think Big Brain Bryn is best used as a tank or disruption piece. He's a henchman, he can toss off attacks, he has Serene Countenance, and he slows people with his attack. You can throw Big Brain Bryn into a place where you need a model, he won't die, and now not only is he slowing your enemy, but he's turning off their bonus actions, which is again what Brewmaster's doing. So I guess in that sense, I'm looking at it as he's getting into position to do the same disruption job. The other model, and the only minion I'd consider 12 Cups on right now, is the Bayou Crier. because the Crier is a model that has a similar durability to Bryn, because you can pitch cards to be on negatives to hit them. They don't have a specific bonus action that they need to do, and while they can obey, and their obey is very strong in Big Hat, sometimes you don't want to obey, and in those instances, running something into the middle of the enemy crew and saying, if you attack me, you're on negatives, you can't use your bonuses near me, and I'm going to mark my territory. Talking through this, I realized that literally all of those models are getting into the middle of the enemy crew, are hard to put down, and so really, this is like a tar pit upgrade.
Mm-hmm. So in that case, so with Brewmaster, you say it's an auto include. So anytime you're taking Brewmaster, you're grabbing 12 cups of coffee. So for the other two models, the Town Crier and Big Brain Bryn, whenever you're taking these models, is this something you're picking up for them as well? Or is it more situational on those models?
It's going to be more situational on them. This upgrade is going to come in when I expect there to be scheme markers in the place I want them to go. I think Bryn is fine at slowing down and disrupting the enemy without the diversion aura, and he has a very useful bonus action, so I'm not necessarily taking it for marked territory. But like I said, some masters, their bonus action can define what they do. An example would be Terra. Terra can summon, she can attack with an OK sword, but her whole bury my models or make you fast, which is how her crew functions, that's her bonus. So getting Bryn into the middle of the enemy Void crew and saying, you can't do that effect. Or Pandora. All of Pandora's woes have Glimpse of Insanity to reach out and stun people as a bonus. And Misery that procs off stunned. Well, here, no, let's have none of that, thank you. The Crier, probably, if I'm hiring a Crier, I am considering 12 cups of coffee. Again, I can load it up with focus early, in Big Hat especially, because Big Hat has half dozen models in there that just dirtle turn one. So you can have like a two Banjanistas that just drop markers and move the rest of the crew up. And then, got to do something with those markers. Might as well mark territory.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I was kind of curious, what situations you're generally taking it in. And as you stated, it's mainly for like tar pitting models. And then it sounds like, so for Brewmaster, it's an auto include. For Big Bane Bryn and Town Crier, it's going to be a little bit more based on what the enemy's crew is doing. And I guess also the scheme pool, if you're looking at using marked territory to kind of deny points to your opponent.
Yeah.
So in that case, are there like certain schemes that you see in the pool and you're just like, all right, we're just going to go 12 cups of coffee?
Yeah. Leave your mark and Runic Binding, Sabotage. Anything that has multiple markers in one spot. And doubly so if those are pools like Corrupted Ley Lines. Because Corrupted Ley Lines is going to dictate to some extent where your models need to go, because there's that center lodestone. If your opponent has, the fabled Claim Jump Leave Your Mark pairing in Corrupted Ley Lines, well, yeah, take this and either they go in and try and score the points that are all in the center, or they're forced to spread their efforts. I will say, thinking about it, another leader who does really well with 12 cups of coffee is Zip. And that's because Zip is another disruption master. Giving him another option to just run around and turn off bonus actions is annoying as heck with his speed. And his bonus puts up a simple dual aura. It's boring conversation. And he can't interact. So Mark Territory gives him a way to remove scheme markers if you need him to do that.
Oh, right, yeah.
And if you think your opponent's going for spread them out, if you absolutely need to, you can fly him anywhere between 8 and 24 inches in a turn, and then pulse out that 3-inch remove scheme marker to turn off spread them out. It's very hard, I think, for your enemy to have a scheme marker that's not within 27 inches and is scoring spread them out.
Okay, so then it sounds like for 12 cups of coffee, you're always taking on tar pits, and the main thing about it is diversion. Marked territory sounds like a nice thing to have, but it's not necessarily going to tip your decision into making that. And then Twitchy is just kind of a dead ability.
Yeah, and it deserves it.
All right, so I guess on the back of that, where do you feel like this upgrade falls within the entire realm of upgrade faction upgrades?
I think this is tied with the other one at just below inferiority complex
Hmm.
because it is providing a benefit, but it's not as universally applicable.
Right. It does feel like, though, that in certain situations, like diversion, like as you said, there's certain models with bonus actions that are kind of like defining for their model and maybe the most powerful action that they have. So it seems like the effects of 12 cups of coffee can be like very overwhelming against certain crews or certain models.
That's fair. I look at inferiority complex, that's very punishing for terrifying and manipulative crews,
Hmm.
but at the same time, those defenses are only good if you take them in multiples. So it's punishing if your opponent leans into that defensive ability, whereas diversion, no one leans into bonus actions.
Right.
As a crew build, everyone will take bonus actions because they're good.
Hmm.
So I guess in that sense, it is generally more applicable. I just feel that because it's within 4 inches of the model it's on, you need it to be on a model that gets stuck in. And that always brings that risk of I'm in the middle of the enemy crew and now they can retaliate.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so then I guess you answered it a little bit, but where do you feel like this falls within the faction upgrades in Bayou?
So in Bayou, I think it's, again, slightly below inferiority complex and tied with the other one in Bayou. In the game overall, I'm going to be weird here and say it's probably a little bit more impactful than inferiority complex and probably in the upper 60
Hmm.
to 70%. And the reason for that is compared to other upgrades in all the other factions, I don't know very many upgrades in the other factions that are like able to shut down schemes with a bonus, right?
Mm-hmm.
This thing actually says if your opponent is trying to do this, I can deny them VP. And the diversion again that's a very potent disruptor.
Right.
So I think that if you're looking at just general power levels, I think this is very strong. I don't know how to articulate why I feel in faction it's less than, but more than out of faction.
I mean, I think we touched on a little bit, right? Depending on like the availability of certain tools or abilities within the faction, it can definitely kind of sway the individual power of an upgrade. So I think when you have someone like Zip and his keyword that already has access to so many ways to remove scheme markers, that if you're going to go into something or a scheme pool, it's like, all right, I want to deny points, I want to eat scheme markers, you're probably thinking more like, well, let's take Zip rather than let's load up people with 12 cups of coffee.
Yeah,
Maybe.
that's fair. That's fair.
And I guess like as far as like overall power level, I now that you say it, it does seem to make sense because there aren't really many models with the ability to turn off bonus actions, and then just being able to put it on any model that you want and fit it into really any kind of build that you want, I think does offer a level of flexibility that other faction upgrades just can't match.
When you say it, it makes a lot more sense and sounds better.
I had some time to think while you were extolling on the virtues of all these upgrades. All right, and now we get to, I guess it's not the strongest faction upgrade within Bayou, but it is my favorite one flavor-wise. 2 gremlins in a ghillie suit. So can you tell us a little bit about this? This actually probably one of the more interesting ones because one of the abilities, it just seems you have to know the faction real well to know when you can take advantage of it. Like the +1 to size has always been like a little interesting upgrade.
Yes. So, like, first off, I just want to get out there. I think this is the only upgrade in the game that gives you 4 things. Every other upgrade that's a general upgrade seems to give you 3. Granted, the 4th only comes into play when your model dies. But here's the thing you are absolutely on the money. +1 size in a faction that's defined by being size 1, it has some weird interactions. So, first off, you do not take this upgrade in kin crews. For those in the back, you do not take this upgrade in kin crews. Ophelia's crew gets benefits when they are attacked by or are targeting models that are taller than them. You do not want to be the same size as your target. It literally will make you worse. So that's the first kind of anti-synergy that we see in an upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
But you do take this in Swamp Fiend. Zoraida loves this upgrade. Zip actually likes this upgrade. And specifically, Gracie likes this upgrade. Now, why do I say that? So, for Zoraida, Zoraida has this thing that she can see through her models, her Swamp Fiends, within 12 inches of her. She can then draw a line of sight and range for her actions through it. Zoraida wants to be able to see across the board to do her obeys and her hexes. And I don't know about you, but most folks play on boards that aren't Planet Bowling Ball and will have buildings, and buildings are anywhere between size 2 and 3, or maybe there's rocks that are size 2 and 3. Where I'm getting at is, it's hard to see something when you're a size 2 human. But Zoraida has several models in her keyword that are natively size 3 or even size 4. The Grootslang, a ludicrously big model for his cost, is size 4 natively. You take him, you give him a gremlin on his 2 gremlins in a ghillie suit, you have a model that's size 5. He can go anywhere on most boards, and Zoraida can see him and go, oh, yep, I'm going to shoot through him. It's bonkers. Disguised gets really disgusting when you consider that in the context of Swamp Fiend, especially for someone like Bad Juju. Bad Juju he is defense 3, he's a henchman, he has Demise Eternal, he has regeneration. The argument basically can boil down to Bad Juju can be hit by anyone if they close their eyes and are dizzy when they take a swing. And because of that, he'll take a bunch of damage and he will die. On the other hand, Bad Juju heals a lot, needs to be killed a bunch of times, so he's, clearly, he's right on the verge of being durable enough.
Mm-hmm.
Let's give him Disguised. Hey, you can't charge him anymore. I think that pushes him over the edge into being a perfect node for Zoraida, because the other thing is, he's also natively size 3. Put him to size 4, you have a ton of terrain options, and Bad Juju loves being in terrain because his planted roots heal him even more for being in that terrain. I would consider this on Bad Juju almost all of the time if I'm taking Bad Juju.
Mm-hmm.
The Demise, where you summon a Bayou Gremlin, is cute. And I'll leave it there. It's another upgrade you're not really looking to put on a minion. The sidearm effect is It is a stat 6 gun between 2 and 3 damage. If you have a model that you want to give a gun to, okay. But everything else is so juicy on a bigger model.
Right.
And I'm ranting about Zoraida here, and she's half Neverborn. Let's talk about someone who's actually in Bayou and has a different use for this. Let's talk about Gracie. If you're a Bayou player and you don't have Gracie, I encourage you to pick her up. Bayou doesn't have a rider equivalent, but I would argue Gracie is as close to it as we can get, because she has Ride With Me. And Ride With Me is one of those abilities that's common throughout all factions, and it solves a lot of problems that the Malifaux Gaining Ground Season 1 ask of every faction. It's mobility, and it's getting that little extra out of your model. Ride With Me and in Zip, Fly With Me that the Skeeters have, they're locked by height when it comes to taking another model with you. So giving you +1 height suddenly unlocks models that are really strong, often your damage dealers, and suddenly you have a new way to deliver your damage dealers. Case in point, I would argue that Francois is a great general purpose damage dealer. But if I'm playing in Zip, Mancha Roja can and will kill most things in one round of actions. He's size 3, and he has no movement tricks other than Rush, so his charges are +2 inches. So he's usually not getting into the fight until turn 2. But if you have a Gracie, or you have an Iron Skeeter that are size 4 because of this upgrade, now you're able to deliver that damage dealer model turn 1, when your opponent's probably not ready for it. It projects more threat with models in your crews than your opponent may expect. And that's also a weird thing generally about the design for Bayou. You have a lot of height 1 models and a lot of height 3 models, and your height 3 models are typically the ones that are doing a lot of damage for you.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I was kind of curious after you mentioned Bad Juju, and he has that Demise trigger that allows him to come back to life if you discard a card. Mm-hmm. So as far as this, and I guess I haven't dealt with it before, but on reading it, it seems like that if you kill Bad Juju and he has this upgrade, you're able to spawn a gremlin pretty much for free, right? You discard a card, Bad Juju comes back, and since you get to choose the order of resolution, you can pop out that gremlin before you go to his other demise trigger. Is that correct, or?
That is incorrect. Unfortunately, if you opt to do Demise Eternal, the rules say it's no longer killed and doesn't treat it as being killed. If you go with Demise, I'm done with this, you kill him and then he is not coming back. So you cannot cheese it to make the clown car Bad Juju.
Well, there goes my idea.
That said, good effort.
Yeah, I love the flavor of this. I guess this is the one where the actions don't really seem to have like a singular idea in my mind. Like you have the +1 size, but then it's disguised. And then you have the demise, which I guess goes with the theme of the card, but it doesn't seem to be building towards a singular purpose. And from the explanations you gave, it sounds like, the demise and disguised are nice little bonus pieces. But for the most part, you're taking it for those weird interactions to like squeeze out a bit more efficiency for like size-based things like ride with me or fly with me, or so that Zoraida can just like have beacons anywhere on the board that she can access reliably. Is that correct?
Yeah, though that's really it in a nutshell. It really is the size. I know I said earlier you don't generally want to take an upgrade just for one of the things. You really want to make sure you're getting mileage out of multiple aspects of it. But in this case, given how size is tied into the mechanics of the cruise in Bayou, it's absolutely worth it to get 2 gremlins in a ghillie suit on a model that's using that size mechanic. And the fact that it pays for itself by summoning a Bayou Gremlin when the model dies, because Bayou Gremlin are versatile models that are 2 soul stones. It's practically a free upgrade.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting when you think about it, because it feels like that this should kind of be an auto include, right? Because it's like, all right, you can pay 2 stones to get like a Bayou Gremlin, or you can pay 2 stones to get a Bayou Gremlin and all these extra things tossed in. But I mean, like for reasons, that we can kind of understand, not necessarily, or even not necessarily like express concisely, that it's not something that you're just taking all the time, or it definitely sounds like it's not something you're taking all the time, and you're really taking it for that size, even though it's effectively costing you nothing when you're looking at the resource side of it.
Yeah, it is probably one of my favorites in Faction, but then again, I am a big fan of Zip, and Zip has a lot of the models that make the most use of size, because Gracie is actually versatile and infamous, so she's keyworded for Zip, and the Iron Skeeters use their size for Fly With Me as well. So I'm probably biased.
So in that case, since you're mainly taking it for the size, and it sounds like you're mainly taking it so you can actually like move around like larger models, at what point do you decide that you need to bring in Gracie and you're going to bring in like Mancha Roja and you're going to move him around? Like, is this something you're kind of doing default when you're playing your Zip cruise, or is there like particular scheme pool? Is there a particular master you're playing against where it's like, all right, we need this extra mobility? I guess in another sense, is this something you're only taking when you're taking Mancha Roja, or is this something that's decided by other factors?
I am probably taking this when I know that I need to get some kind of alpha strike. I don't take it all the time in my Zip cruise. Zip is super mobile and is really disruptive, but Mancha Roja and Gracie and this upgrade is like a 20 plus soul stone investment in your 50 stone crew. I'm bringing that when I need to fight on the center line and want to do that starting turn 1. A lot of games in season 1 of Gaining Grounds feel like they become a scrum in the middle, so it does lend itself to that. I think in other crews, Sommer I think has legs with Gracie in place of one of the bigger other models. Like Sommer's keyword has a lot of moving parts, but Lenny and Georgie and Olaf are both size 3, and they're kind of important in Big Hat. So if you take Gracie to help move them around, Lenny can toss people so he likes having that size bonus. Georgie and Olaf are guns, so they want to be a turret. So being able to put them into position with Ride With Me is really nice. To summate it, I'm taking Gracie if I need to put a piece into a position turn 1 to save it the walk, which kind of seems obvious. That's what most of the riders do, except that riders also have their Revel in Whatever ability that they can spend fate tokens and just win you the game. Gracie doesn't do that. She's made of better stuff than that. I say that, but really, I really wish Weird, please give Bayou a rider.
So then it sounds like, you're taking this mainly when you expect there to be a fight or you want to set up to a fight. So is this something where the deployment will heavily play into when you're taking this upgrade? So if like you're in corner deployment, is this something you're more likely to take, or is it really more how much you expect to be fighting rather than the positioning at the start of the game?
I think this is more applicable in wedge and flank deployments, unless we're talking about the Ride With Me, Fly With Me parts. In Ride With Me, Fly With Me, I think it is always relevant. And the reason for that is in the closer deployments of flank and wedge, your opponent is going to be able to charge you turn 1 with a dedicated damage dealer model most of the time, because you have that. I don't remember the math, but they're like 9 inches away at the closest points between the 2 deployment zones, or something close to that, which is like a walk charge from a model, especially if you give them that extra mobility. Having disguised and putting it on a model in the way means your opponent can't just walk charge. Now they have to walk and maybe walk again, or get their own pushes through, and that provides an opportunity for you to interrupt it. On the longer deployment zones of corner and standard, I think you have enough distance between the deployment zones that you can afford the Ride With Me, Fly With Me to get in position. On corner, you absolutely do, and it's almost more important, because in corner you both have the greatest distance between deployment zones, so closing that distance is going to be more important.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I guess like overall, it sounds like really the only time you're taking this is when you need more mobility for the schemer pool you're going into. And it seems like there's a pretty heavy tax with it, since when you're taking it for that mobility, you necessarily need like Gracie or some Iron Skeeters to even kind of enable them and move those like harder hitting Bayou models into position without having to kind of like waste activations on them walking.
Yeah, and so I guess in that sense, this upgrade is both more potent and a bigger investment, so perhaps less potent overall. I don't know, I get weird when I talk about the math of things, because you can talk about models in a vacuum or upgrades in a vacuum like we have, and it's useful to an extent, but Malifaux doesn't exist in a vacuum. You don't just have a crew of several models of different cost. You have a crew that is 50 soul stones.
Right.
And you have interworking pieces there. Now you can have synergies from your keyword, or you can just have synergies from your core mechanics of the crew. And I think this is one that really benefits a crew that is using those mobility pieces, those mobility abilities.
I think like really looking at this and having you explain it or talk through it again actually brings up like a really interesting thought to me. So, I mean, if we're looking at the math of things, right, as you explained, this is just at its cost. It's definitely worth more than 2 stones, just looking at the abilities you get and the fact that you get a 2 soulstone model. But it's also something that you're not really taking that much. It sounds like within the Bayou faction is probably the thing you're looking at the least, and only in very specific circumstances. So it kind of brings up the idea, and like I'm not sure if you have an answer for this, because I definitely don't. Generally, when you're looking at things like, is it worth the stone cost to bring this? And like, even though for 2 gremlins in a ghillie suit, it should be emphatically yes. Does that mean, and it's not something we're taking all the time, and it's definitely not something I would consider like overpowered, but does that mean when like looking at other upgrades, do we expect upgrades now to be worth more than a 2 stone cost? So like anything that's actually costed appropriately will be considered like kind of weak or underpowered.
I don't know. That is an interesting thought. I would argue that we know that just slapping a 2 cost on all the generic upgrades is, all the generic upgrades are 2 cost. We also know that all the generic upgrades have gone through the ringer as far as errata, and some passed and some had to be adjusted. So we know that 2 stones is not the same between factions when it comes to these upgrades.
Right.
I hear they even made Outcast general upgrades.
I'd be interested to see those someday.
One day. The joke, dear listener, is that the Outcast generic upgrades are generally panned by Outcast players. As someone who's played Outcast and has used them, you'll have to turn into our Outcast episode, or Outcast upgrades episode, to hear my thoughts on that. But the long and short of it is, I think in the future, if they start adding in more generic upgrades, I want to say the word cumulative effects of the upgrade will need to be considered. If you take an upgrade for 2 stones and it turns a model from a 7 stone model to a 9 stone model, but it's really having the impact of a 13 stone model, yeah, it's undercosted as an upgrade and you take it all the time. I don't know. I don't know if you can evaluate them that way given the nature of Malifaux and how flexible crew building is.
Yeah, I would generally agree. I mean, I think, just looking at it based on it, if we're going to say that Malifaux is simply about taking the most cost-efficient things, then either all the upgrades are much more efficient than 2 stones, which I guess could be the case, or like 2 gremlins in a ghillie suit should be an auto-include no matter what, because it's just free abilities. Yeah, I don't have a good answer either.
Yeah, I think that there is a point where the flexibility that just a soulstone or another model brings needs to be weighed, and especially when it comes to 2 gremlins in a ghillie suit. I don't think this is an auto include. Even in a zip crew, I'm probably taking one of these on my taxi. I'm not going to take a Gracie and an Iron Skeeter and give them both 2 gremlins in a ghillie suit, because that level of redundancy is unnecessary.
Right.
And, for 4 stones, that's a flying piglet in zip, and they are a model that can move and interact and fly. So I have to be like, do I want to have the taxi option, or do I want to have another significant model? At the same time, this is getting into crew building theory. I think all of the Bayou upgrades that we've talked about generally have their place, and I know in this discussion, a lot of it has been colored by my biases on how I use these upgrades. I think other factions, especially like Arcanists, aside from magical training, there are times where Soulstone Cache is above and beyond turning something from a enforcer into a better than henchman.
Right. Yeah, that'll be an interesting discussion to have, because I feel like it's something that a lot of people kind of understand, but it's something, I guess as like our rambling for like the past 5 or 10 minutes has shown, it's something very difficult to articulate in like a meaningful way. The cumulative effect on a model, I think, rings very true. Like, there are certain upgrades that, when combined with like certain other things, brings it way above the 2 stone cost. Whereas, if you put it on other models, it's not even worth it, or not even worth considering. So I guess, now that we've gone on that huge tangent, reel it back in a little so we can keep our format and pretend that, we have a very well structured and well hosted show. So where do you feel that, I guess we've kind of already answered at this point, but where do you feel that, this upgrade falls within Malifaux as a whole? And I guess in the Bayou faction, as you mentioned before, it's already kind of tied with 12 Cups of Coffee. So I guess we already know that. So how do you feel it stacks up to other faction upgrades in the world of Malifaux? I
think it's still in that upper 60-65%. So the thing is, yes, 2 gremlins in a ghillie suit, when you're putting it on a taxi, is extending the threat range of some very dangerous damage dealer models. 4 of the other factions have that already with their built-in Ride With Me model. I'm sorry, 6 other factions, because McCabe is a 10 Thunder and Explorer, and he has Ride With Me. So literally everyone except for, I think, Outcasts don't have a Ride With Me target. So 2 gremlins in a ghillie suit is strong, but it's really just giving Bayou access to something the other factions have natively. In models that you will often see taken. McCabe is not often, but he is also an incredibly versatile master, and if you play in a meta that allows master hiring, you could do worse than hiring McCabe into most crews.
Right, right.
So that's why I say it's slightly above the curve, but it's not super above the curve.
Yeah, it seems like in contrast to a lot of other upgrades, it doesn't actually give you like a new action or a new ability, but rather it lets you expand on an ability that the model already has.
Right, and in that sense, it's a lot similar to Inferiority Complex, where it helps you double down on what you're trying to do. The disguised angle is nice, but at the end of the day, if you don't have something like stealth, and this is something we did not talk about, but another infamous or Swamp Fiend, the first mate, he is a model that can do some really silly things with this upgrade, because he also has Butterfly Jump and Stealth. So once you add Stealth and Disguised and Butterfly Jump together, you make a model that your opponent will only ever get one swing on at a time, unless they have a trigger that you're coming with me where they place next to them after everything's resolved. But that's a very niche thing, and you're not always going to want to have it. Yeah, I don't think it changes the power ranking in the Bayou faction or in all the factions, but I think that is something to let folks know that yes, you can make a nigh unkillable model with 2 gremlins in a ghillie suit.
I feel like this also kind of comes into like the cumulative effect. You already have stealth, you already have butterfly jump. Like disguised on top of that is great, but like, is it really necessary? Do you really need that much survivability?
If you expect them to go for vendetta on you, or if you take him and something else for hidden martyrs, well, you want him to live and be able to get to that enemy model at the end of the game. So that's a great way to do it.
Cool. So, I mean, I guess in that case, it sounds like something, it's definitely something to keep in mind as one of your options when you're running the first mate. Okay, so I think that about covers it for the Bayou Faction upgrades. We went on a few tangents. We had to kind of re-examine how we used words and phrasings this episode, so that was great. Did you have any final thoughts or I guess observations, Jim?
The only thing I'd like to close with is that when it comes to hiring your crew and evaluating upgrades, I just want to make a point, like I've said several times this episode, a lot of these are my biases from my time playing Bayou. And I know that you, the listener, may have had completely different experiences. We're not telling you this is the way to play these upgrades or this is the truth when it comes to how valuable these upgrades are. You may have a different experience, and that is valid. And if you have had a different experience, I want you to tell us about it. Let us know in wherever we're posting this what your experience has been, and let's get a discussion going about these upgrades, because I think that the more we share about our experiences in Malifaux, the more opportunities we have to learn and maybe try something new.
Yeah, if you guys have any comments, observations, we always love to hear them. We also have a Patreon if you want to support us and keep hearing us talk about anything that kind of floats into our mind, our biases, or if there's any topic you want us to talk about, please let us know. And yeah, until next time, thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.